Joe DeFalco, owner of Future Stars of Wrestling, and you are drinking at Moe's.
All right, everybody. Want to thank Reaper Apparel for having Drinkin at Moe's be a brand ambassador. They encourage everybody to break out of that comfort zone, live their best self, which, hey, that's what got me starting the podcast. But they got great clothing, great apparel, t-shirts, hoodies, beanies, hats, all that good stuff. Be sure, link will be in the description, and use the code Drinkin at Moe's to get 10% off your order. Let's fucking go.
All right, everybody, welcome to Drinkin at Moe's. Big Mo here. Be sure YouTube, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, because it helps out with the algorithm. We're most places you can find your podcast. Today I have with me, pretty excited, Joe DeFalco from FSW. We're going to be talking about the big Mecca show they got going on this weekend. How you doing?
Doing good. You know, it's always that long preparation before the show that you think you have so much time, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, it's show day.
I can imagine. I've helped set up for a few shows, and always amazes me. There's sometimes where, they had everything prepared, but as sometimes they say the card is subject to change, and sometimes that change comes day of show and the scrambling to figure something out. And then other times, like you said, you're so busy setting everything up for the show during, the week of the show. And then, before you know it, there's show day.
Yeah, we were fortunate on this one because I had talked with Morrison way back, and we were talking about using him earlier. And then it was like, hey, we're looking at doing the Mecca. He was free that day, so it was kind of already locked in. And then it was just filling in the blanks. And we've been fortunate. The name fits us well, Future Stars of Wrestling. We use guys like Royce Isaacs, Jarrell Nelson, Tito Escondido, and Che. We used them 7 years ago when nobody knew who they were. So now they've broken out in New Japan, who's in AEW, like Toa. So it's really a show that is combining a lot of the past, present, and future of FSW.
That is very true now that I think about it, because like you said, you got guys like Royce Isaacs, like the rest of Team Filthy. You got Tito Escondido, and then you get guys coming in like John Morrison, or Johnny Mecca as he's known for the show, Chris Bay. Like, the talent is just amazing. And then you got your guys, you're like Gregory Sharp, the Nevada State champion right now, that everything I've seen of his is like all right.
No, yeah, he's been with us for a very long time, and he really broke out last year, and he's been dying to have this match with TJP. So that definitely could be a match of the night candidate, because Sharp, and we'll go back in time at one of the earlier Meccas when we had TJP. He was fired up, man. He wanted that match with TJP, but we had done a tournament, and in the Limitless tournament that we had done, in Douglas James won. So the kind of idea was for the winner of the tournament to get him. And Sharp was a little hot about it. He's been with me for a very, very long time. He started at like 19 years old. And he was doing the Hyper Street character that I didn't really feel was, top level worthiness to wrestle a guy like TJP. So, Hyperstreak disappeared, Gregory Sharp, and he has been killing it. It's crazy to say. It's like, well, yeah, he's probably our wrestler of the year, but it's like guys like Jay Vidal and Matt Vandergrift, Hammerstone. There's so many candidates because our roster is so deep. There's so many guys that aren't on the Mecca that are probably sitting home pissed off because they didn't get to be on the show.
Oh yeah, TJP. I've had a very familiar history with him. He was involved in one of the promotions that got me started with independent wrestling when I was stationed out in San Diego. I believe it was B-Boy, him, and Scorpio Sky in a triple threat. To this day, still one of my favorite matches I've ever seen.
Yeah, definitely good people in there. I saw Sky a couple weeks ago at the Impact taping. So, maybe we'll be able to get him back. So I've heard they've loosened up things in AEW because guys like him initially had a contract that they couldn't work out. So now I guess they can. So kind of opens up the fights a little bit even more.
Oh yeah, no, I've been hearing they've kind of loosened the strings on that a little bit, as long as I guess the shows don't conflict with AEW schedules. And I know now they're doing their House Rules non-televised shows, so they got a bit of more of a schedule. But then one match on the card that I'm excited about, Jai Vidal versus Effie. Like, that one's going to be entertaining as hell.
Well, yeah, when we put together the shows, wrestling has changed so much. And, there's that social media vibe where there's people who have huge buzzes that traditional wrestling fans may not know who Effie is because of the explosion of GCW. Effie is a big name in independent wrestling. And Vidal, he's gotten to work the gay brunch. He's working the next one next week, WrestleMania weekend. So having those guys go one-on-one here in Vegas, it's a pretty big deal. So, getting Effie, we were even trying to get Alley Catch in the women's match, but unfortunately everything was just too late, and then she ended up getting a different booking. But you got to have those buzz wrestlers. You got to have those WWE guys, and now it's the AEW guys. And Donis just exploded, big win in AAA, and Hammerstone and King. So again, it's trying to mix and match and come up with the best ideas, because Mecca is different than a regular FSW show. So it's easy for us to have Jay Vidal wrestle Matt Vandergrift. Well, that's happened a few times. The idea at the Mecca is to bring in the best of the best, mix them in with the best of FSW, and take it from there. And in some cases, it's just going to be a match that isn't two FSW guys. Usually we're going to have maybe 6 to 8 FSW guys instead of 20. So, you're getting to see new faces, new matchups. And it's like, we're not concerned with the FSW storyline, the universe of what Future Stars of Wrestling, puts on the network into a regular pay-per-view. Like the Mecca has been a standalone show.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that, and you guys have done a good job, definitely, of this one. I mean, you brought up Sam Adonis. Like, good Lord, the explosion he's had as of late. And I heard of him before this, but I really became familiar with him through my friends out at Warrior Wrestling based out of Chicago there. And he was there. Sorry, my dogs are acting crazy. But he was their lucha champion for the longest time. And seeing him through them, and then now on this Mecca show, you got him versus, we talked a little bit about Hammerstone versus another guy a lot of people with familiar with him through this other guy through Impact, Kenny King, in a triple threat. That I'm another one I'm excited about because all these guys have had definitely great years alone by themselves, and then you're getting all three of them in one match here.
Well, yeah, initially Kenny was supposed to work Sam Adonis at the Mecca we had in February when we had Cross come back when he wrestled Jacob Fatu. But there was a really bad snowstorm going all over the Midwest, and Sam was unable to get out of Pittsburgh. So we ended up moving Kenny into a scramble. And again, we had to shake a bunch of things up. Casey Navarro. So initially I was going to do Hammerstone and Adonis. And I didn't really have plans for Kenny King to be on the show because Impact is running a taping on Friday and Saturday. And it seemed like it might be Sunday. So I'm not sure with the information that got passed along, but Chris Bay was like, oh, no, I'll be there on Sunday. Because I guess Ace Austin posted something and made it seem like the taping was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I'm like, you're going to make the show. So I was always under the impression that there was a taping Sunday, but normally there are guys out, Sunday, and they're not really worried about the time frame. But Chris had known that he's wrestling Morrison, he needs to be back. And then about a week to 10 days ago, Kenny's like, hey, yeah, we're all on the same flight. We'll be in at like 9 a.m, blah, blah, blah. I'd really like to be on the Mecca. And it's like, well, we have our 8 matches and we are pretty set, but Kenny in 20 years has done a lot. I've known Kenny for a long time and he's been one of my trainers for a very long time. We don't use Kenny all the time. So when Kenny's available, I'm going to try to figure out a spot for him to make him happy because, he's earned that right in FSW. So it was like, well, we don't have a triple threat match. Let's just add Kenny to that match. And then we made it kind of like, a multi-promotional match. You got the MLW champion, you got an Impact superstar, and you got a superstar. So again, it offers something a little different that fans have probably never seen that matchup before.
Oh, you know what? I can't say I remember ever seeing that anywhere. And, you got a little bit of something for everybody all in that one match. Another match that I'm kind of looking forward to because I have had at least one of the guys in this match on my podcast a while back, Remy Marcel, in the scramble match. I'm a bit of a fan of scramble matches because sorry about that, but scramble matches, you never really know what to expect with the amount of people in there, and then you get the people of different sizes, different athletic abilities,
different styles.
Yeah, and it's like I said, you never know what to expect. And this one, you got Juicy Finale in there, and like I said, Remy Marcel, and it's like, who? And then there's a little, at least as far as the promotional thing I saw on social media, there's a little bit of a question mark there. Like there's a little bit of a mystery on who one of the participants is going to be.
Well, I could leak it out. It wasn't for any other reason than we were trying to get the full flyer. And I was kind of deciding because Bodie, who's 15 years old, who's been making, he's the next generation Nick Wayne, he started with us in our kids class at like 9 years old. And you got to be 12 or 13. And it was like, there was nothing left to do in the kids class. And his mom was like, hey, is there any chance we could get him into the adult class, try it out? So, we put him in there for like once a week for a little while. And it was like, okay, he seemed to be picking things up. And in no time, he had from the kids class and his time in the adult class, he was better than, 80% of the students already. And the kid was 13 years old. And unfortunately, we never filmed it, but we did an EC3 seminar when we first came back for our 2-night anniversary weekend. And EC3 did a seminar and he put together matches. And everybody was raving about, at the time, it was 15-year-old Nick Wayne against 13-year-old Bodie. And we've tried to recreate that in front of crowds, but unfortunately, we just haven't, been able to make it work. Billy Starks, who was like 16 or 17 last year, got involved with Bodie in a scramble we did with Revolver. But Nick Wayne ended up wrestling, I think, Trey Miguel and Jay Vidal, because that's what Sammy Callahan won. So we're doing a Future Legends tournament, 25 and under AEW weekend. And we were trying to lock up so we could have Bodie versus Nick Wayne. But again, Nick Wayne's going to be out of the country. And from what I see, he might be in Japan in May. So, we have Jacob Austin Young, who is really also taken off this year, a guy that we trained. And he was with us for a long time, like Gregory Sharp, who have gotten great opportunities with New Japan Strong. So having those three that are pretty much fan favorites of FSW, and having Juicy, who's a guy people love to love, I make sure we would at least have the heel dynamic as the guy. So I decided, trying to keep it homegrown as much as possible. We had great it could have been Primo Henio, could have been Jordan Cruz, it could have been Class, could have been Devin Reno. It could have been a lot of these guys who've done a lot for us in a short time that their potential is through the roof. But we were going to go with Brett the Threat, who was the runner-up for the Rookie of the Year. Again, totally different style, more MMA-based, very cocky, very confident for a guy who's only got 2 years in the business. But he's really, taken off, working a lot in NorCal, SoCal, a little bit Arizona. And we feel this is the right time for Brett to get that, Mecca match. It is a big deal for the younger guys.
Oh yeah. No, I can imagine, especially on, you mentioned how big the Mecca shows are, to get them on a stage, a big stage like that. Yeah, I can imagine there's some of the younger talent there that are just chomping at the bit to get on it.
It's by far considered, the name says it all. It's Mecca, being on an anniversary show, maybe, there's a lot of different things that are going on. So it's like when we have No Escape, and we do that every year in January, that's our big steel cage show. And involving storylines, regardless of your level, there's a good chance you might be on the show because we're setting up certain matchups. We're not bringing in outside talent where those younger guys get the opportunity. Mecca is a who's who of the wrestling business. So from the top of the card, you got Morrison and Bay. You got Team Filthy. So my heavyweight champion and tag champs are both in the same group. So Lights Camera Faction. I want the Mecca Grand Championship to basically overshadow the FSW heavyweight championship. So that's generally a show I'm not going to defend the FSW title on. But how can I not have my FSW champion on the show?
No, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because Bay and Mech and John Morrison are the main event, bar none. And by doing that, it also frees up something. I like 6-man tags. I'm a big fan of the tag teams. So Team Filthy, who we tried to get at the last Mecca, but Royce and Jarrell couldn't make it because they had flight issues where they were coming at it. Because initially, but it wasn't going to be the faction. It was like Tyler Bateman, Cutthroat Cody, and Funny Bone was going to wrestle the faction, the Team Filthy. And then Royce and Jarrell didn't make it. So then we turned it into a tag match. And Danny Limelight, who's also part of Team Filthy, did double duty that night and ended up working the tag team of Funny Bone and Tyler Bateman. with the name Violence Unlimited, where a lot of people don't know, they think of Violence Unlimited and Ring of Honor with Tyler Bateman and Vincent. Literally 13 years ago, that was the tag team in SoCal. It was Violence Unlimited. So Bateman just basically took the name of the team he used to have with Funny Bone to use. So it's like, okay, well, I want to get my tag champs on. I want to get them. Perfect scenario, because Team Filthy, you know, have been a faction that's been doing it for a few years with huge success. And the faction, our faction, Lights Camera faction, they're a little newer to the party. They're just starting to get some accolades and things like that. So this is a really big match for them.
Oh, I can imagine so. You know, you get your guys with the heavyweight title, the tag titles against a team doing amazing things like all throughout independent wrestling and even over into New Japan with all the stuff that they've been doing, and, you know, getting to mix them in there with guys that have been on a stage like New Japan. It's going to be a good one. And like you, I am a fan of tag team wrestling. There's just something about it that I love, and I love it when I see promotions out there that are bringing it back to the forefront, because there's been more so on the national scale where a lot of promotions have kind of pushed tag team wrestling on the back burner, and now getting to see it where people are putting an emphasis on it and giving it a good spotlight. I'm loving it.
Well, you know, it's a fact of people that know me and know us and things at FSW, but being a guy who likes tag teams, I put together Royce and Jarrell. They were two random singles guys, and we were fortunate enough to work with a company in China called the OWE, who working a little bit with AEW after us. But they came to us because one of their guys, Fan, I think worked at Cirque du Soleil, and he came down to the school. And again, you know, people blow smoke up your ass all the time. Like, oh, yeah, I got my boss in China, Mr. Fu, and he wants to bring you guys out there. And it's like, yeah, okay, whatever. I've heard this story a million times. But truth be told, it ended up coming to fruition. And Remy Marcel, whose tag partner was Jack Manley at the time, they got to go to China, and they trained under Sima, who was their main trainer. But Sima was in Japan, and he had a lot going on, and they wanted to bring in and mix the Japanese and the American styles of wrestling. So Jack and Remy went. They needed guys. They took Sugar Brown and Clutch, who was the Bonus Boys tag team. Damian Drake and Spider at the time were the Midnight Marvels. Jacob Austin Young, who was in a tag team, he left. So that broke up that tag team. We literally lost 4 or 5 of our tag teams. Well, how many tag teams are you going to have on an independent show that are local? You know, probably 5 or 6. You know, there might be one team left in the mix. So as I knew this was going down, I had an idea for a name. We had the BFFs a while back, and it ended up being a guy who's now doing very well for himself, Dak Draper and NW. Martin Casaus, Marty the Moth was in it, and a few other guys, and they were kind of a group. And I was breaking off the group because Royce was also another honorary member who came in late. And it was like, well, Royce and Jarrell, you know, 2 guys, great shape. They both come from SoCal, but they don't know each other at all. And it's like they want to come to FSW and they want to make a statement. And right now there's no statement for them in the singles ranks. You know, I got things going on. I'm like, hey, I got this idea. I said, I even have a team name. They're called the 1%. You guys fit that mold of what I'm looking for. You know, you guys, you're bigger, you're badder, you're better than everybody else. The 1%. Because I had another idea. It was called the Billionaire Boys Club, which was similar with the guys that I wanted to use. But then Dak Draper went to the Ring of Honor school. So by losing him, it kind of changed the dynamic a little bit. So credit to Royce and Jarrell. They said, absolutely, we'll give this a shot. And then over the next 6 months, now they became traveling partners. They became friends. They worked out together. They took bookings together. And within a year or so, they became the hottest tag team on the West Coast. But they had never been together as a tag. They never hung out. They never did anything. Similar to Hammerstone and Graves with the Gods of War. I put them together. They traveled together, but they were two singles guys doing things. And it was like, I have an idea. Tito and Shay. That's why I laugh about the four-way tag we're doing. We got Shay. At the time, Tito was teaming with a guy named Rico Dynamite, who's known in the SoCal area. Shay had come up with them. I liked the way they looked together. I put them together. They're now back and they're doing big things. And then the former 1%, now they're back and they've exploded. You know, we haven't used them for probably 3 years. And, you know, the last time we saw them, they actually wrestled Tito and Shay at our anniversary show back 3 years ago. Toa Leona, the first match he ever had in front of a crowd was in FSW. You know, he went to Rikishi school. How the hell did I know? Well, he came up to me. You know, GCW rented the arena one time and Juicy and him were doing some tag stuff. And he came up to me. And I see this big Samoan dude, like, okay, comes up to me. He's like, hello, Mr. DeFalco. I want to introduce myself. Blah, 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 blah. I go by Toa Leona. And it turns out that Sefa Fatu, Solo Sikoa, who's obviously the son of Rikishi. So he saw the talent potential of certain guys at Knox Pro, which is Rikishi's school. And he's like, you need to get into FSW, bro. And he came and talked to me. And, you know, a million people introduced themselves. You know what I mean? And then he ended up wrestling a tag match the next day on something. And I was like, oh, let me get that number, bro. And then we booked them. And then within no time, they became our tag team champions, Toa and Juicy. And the problem in the past was like Juicy had a lot of booking. So it ended up being where Toa ended up working a good amount of singles matches. And it was like, now we finally locked in Juicy. And Toa was like, oh, sorry, boss, I can't make it. I'm doing AEW. And then I'm like, I'm doing AEW. And then he calls me up one day and he's like, hey, I got news for you. And it's like, it's bittersweet because, of course, you're excited that shit, Toa Leona, man, as little experience he has, but he has a great look. He's a monster. You knew it was probably going to happen, but you were hoping it might be a little later down the line.
Oh yeah, now look at him and all the stuff he's doing there with Ring of Honor, them bringing that back and being a part of the 6-man tag champs along there with Brian Cage, just part of the embassy and all the success that he's having there. Like I can imagine, you know, there's that one hand you're excited for the person and all the opportunities and the success that they're having, but you know, when it comes to like, dang, you know, you're a little bit, I guess, for the lack of a better way to put it, bummed because you're just like, dang it, we had this plan, but you know, you're doing good, so I'm happy for you.
You know, and the funny thing is, like a Solo Sikoa, it was like, yeah, we figured he might get signed eventually. The idea was probably to put the belt on him over Hammerstone, and then it was like, I remember it was probably a January of the year he signed, like, hey, Oos, you know, looks like I'm going. I'm like, when are you going? He's like, next month. I'm like, shit. And it's like, as the greedy promoter, I guess you can say, I love it when my guys sign with like Impact or they sign with Honor because I could use them.
Yeah.
You know, when Zoe Stark signed, it was like, done. Can't use her. It was like, I'm leaving in 3 weeks. It was like, okay, we got to drop the belt. We got to do all this. Karrion Kross, he's leaving. You know, when he was in Impact, I could still use him. When he was in AAA, I'm still using him. And it's the same thing. Hammerstone and MLW, he's their champion, but I still use him whenever I want to and whenever it fits. So the WWE, again, it's also the standard bearer because now when we're promoting our school and we're promoting, hey, Karrion Kross, Solo Sikoa, and Zoe Stark, we trained them. Go along with Chris Bay and Jay Vidal, who just got signed. So, it builds us up. And you wish nothing for the best, obviously. Solus was killing it. Guys like LA Knight was the guy who started with me in 2009 or 10. He used to tag team with Cage back in Championship Wrestling from Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
They were called Natural Selection. So Cage started working for me at the end of 2009. Ricker, who how he went by back then, before he became, Eli Drake, and then he became Slate Randall for a brief time in NXT. Went to LA Knight, and then to Max Dupree, back to LA Knight. But he's a guy that we had multiple time champion with us from almost the very beginning. And, that means a lot, because we got a lot of these guys, way before other people knew who they were.
Oh, yeah. And then you also think about it when the big, like, WWE or even AEW comes in, and you have talent that they're signed there now, but, they come in and they have stuff for like Dark or other things, or use them as extras on WWE shows. And you have the talent there, they can be like, hey, I know where we can get some people for this or that or whatever it might be. And definitely a good feeling to know that, you had a hand in kind of maybe guiding them towards the directions where they're at now, and then them in a way kind of giving back to, FSW.
For me, as a lifelong wrestling fan and loving wrestling, and that's why I started FSW, but there's more joy because 14 years later, there's shows that are good, there's shows that are bad, there's shows that are forgetful, whatever. But there's more joy in Karrion Kross, Kevin hitting me up, and it's like, oh, I'm getting signed, and Zoe, I'm getting signed, and Solo Sikoa and Chris Bay, who traveled from Virginia because he thought this would be the best school for him, with basically 3 months tuition in his pocket. Here you go, Joe. And then after that, it was like trying to sweat him for money because he didn't keep a job, because I can't work at this place. They won't let me get off on Saturday for a show. And he'd quit, and he'd be a guy. And I've told this story to anybody who listens. Chris put all his eggs in one basket, and it's not something that I would recommend for any person to do. But Chris, it was all or nothing. And I remember him being frustrated, because he'd go into Impact, and for some reason he'd wrestle a match with like a Daga, who's a main roster guy, and they'd go 13, 14 minutes, like back and forth. It's like, you have that much confidence in this kid to wrestle one of your main dudes who might be the X Division champion at the time, or just was, and you're giving him a 50-50 match. Like, why wouldn't you sign him? And it was like, dude, look at Brian Cage and look at LA Knight. Man, it took them years. And Brian Cage for years was considered one of the best independent wrestlers. And he's never got, the break he needed. LA Knight got signed, got released again. And then they both ended up making names for themselves in Impact. And what it did for Chris Bay was he had a WWE show in Vegas, and they brought in a bunch of extras. And a guy that we worked with from the beginning of Global Force into Impact, who we became very friendly with, was Sanjay Dutt. And they needed a match for 205 or main event. I think it was 205. And it was against Sean Devari's brother. And Sean, whenever he was in Vegas, he trained with us. And when he lost his job recently, like at that time, he wasn't there, but his brother was. And they needed a match for Arya. And Sanjay Dutt walked in, and basically out of a large group of people, he was like, this guy here, Chris Bay, put him in the match. And Chris Bay got put in the match. And within 3 days, Impact now made him an offer to be a contracted wrestler. So that's, would that have happened? Maybe, probably, but maybe it would happen later. Maybe it wouldn't have. Who knows? Because the trajectory of everything was, if you saw like AEW, Cody Rhodes was calling out the name Chris Bay.
Yeah.
And he was already signed. Like, if that didn't happen and it was now 6 months later, would Chris Bay have been in AEW? And that's what this business is about. It's making good connections. And treating people. I remember when we first started, we had a seminar with Eugene. And we had a good turnout. It was the first ever seminar. We had just opened up the school probably a couple months. So we had a good deal. Eugene was going to be in town. His girl worked for like the Dollar Loan Center, which is a big deal out here. And they had like some convention. So I was like, hey, I'm going to be out here. So he worked us a good deal. So it included the seminar. He was going to wrestle in the match. I got him at the local card place that we do business with the signing. And we had a really good turnout. And then we finally got a casino show probably 9 months later, maybe even a year. It wasn't that like a month later. And then we did another seminar and literally one person showed up. And it was like, so did you guys really believe that you can learn everything that this man had to offer you in a 2-hour seminar?
Yeah. No,
the part was literally 6 months later, he became a coach at the Performance Center. And it was like, wow, now if you would have went to that seminar and been like, now you contact the guy and say, obviously you got to be good. Some people are doing it. But if you're really good and say, hey, because you were cordial, you were talkative, you basically try to make an impression on the guy. Hey, my name's Mike. I was at FSW a couple times. You had a seminar, was wondering. Like, at worst, maybe he can lead you in the right direction to maybe getting looked at. And people just pass that and not understanding that, it's about how many connections you can make. That way, if something happens down the line, that person remembers you, gets a liking to you. Hey, you're the guy who drove him from the airport both times. So he knows who you are. So if you're any good and he sees you're good, or you can send him something to look at, there's a better shot. I remember when Sanjay Dutt, when they were doing the Global Force, the second or third taping, they needed a tag team to wrestle the Bollywood. Remy Marcel and Jack Manley, they were a main tag team. And they had sent stuff to Sanjay Dutt. But guess what? He didn't watch it. Why didn't he watch it? Because he got 1,000 tapes. You can't watch it. So we were talking. I'm like, hey, I got some guys that you might be interested, blah, blah, blah. Hey, send me some links. He went and looked it. He liked me when he had the fro and they cut the promo. And it was like, yeah, I like these guys. And that's how they got booked on the show.
No, I was going to say, I became familiar with Remy and his tag partner at the time through a promotion up in, and now DeFalco,
North Dakota, Minnesota guy.
It was in Fully Loaded Wrestling out of North Dakota.
Yeah.
Then, that's we talked a little bit about the promotion in China. That's how I got familiar with them. And then, now doing this, and like you bring up a good point, because, you never know when an opportunity like that is going to come up, because, you went to the seminar the one time, but if he comes back, it's like, it kind of brings me back to that saying that you often hear in wrestling feuds or something, where it's like, I taught you everything you know, but I didn't teach you everything I know. That's sort of a thing. So it's like, you can always learn more. There's always room for improvement. You can always learn new things. And even if you've been to a seminar with somebody once, what's to say you don't learn something new that second time?
You know, it always, there's always certain things that somebody's going to say that's going to click at that time. Now, when you first did the seminar, you might have 3 months in and you've had no matches. Now you're a year and 3 months in and you've had 20 matches. And now you're understanding what somebody is saying to you more so than just being a young kid trying to meet the WWE superstar. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. No, I totally agree.
And it's like, you know, when new students try to, you know, hit me up, well, you know, how long is it going to be before I get my first match? I'm like, I have no fucking clue. It's like, are you going to be there 4 days a week? Or are you going to be there 1 day a week? Are you going to be bullshitting and marking out every time Rob Van Dam walks in our building? And I need to get a picture because this is Vegas. There's a lot of wrestling people that live here. So been in our place numerous times. And Jeff Cobb pops in when he feels like training. Rey Mysterio was there a couple weeks ago. You know, they live there. We have a good, you know, Disco Inferno used to be our trainer. He's boys with Ray. So of course, when Ray wants to use a ring, he's going to hit up Disco, who's going to hit me up. And, you know, and that's how everything happens. Or TJP lives in town now and he wants to roll around because, you know, he has to go back to Japan in a week and a half, or he'll run a class for us. And the great thing about a lot of these guys are that they love wrestling. So if he's available and Kenny King can't make it, he's more than happy to fill in the class. Chris Bay will fill in the class. D'Lo Brown, you know, left for a while because he was doing Impact. He's coming back in a couple weeks. And it's like, it's a who's of the wrestling business that any single day you could walk by and be like, oh shit, this person's here.
Oh yeah, no. Building those connections, you never know when you're going to get the chance to sit under the learning tree of somebody like a D'Lo Brown, TJP, Chris Bay, whoever it might be. And, you know, building those positive connections, you get those chances. You might get those bridges built to Impact, to AEW, to New Japan, wherever it might be. And, you know, then before you know it, with the way you've built up the Mecca shows, before you know it, you're one of those people that's coming in at the height of things like Chris Bay, like John Morrison, like Hammerstone, and all those guys.
Yeah, and just having them there. And it's amazing because of those guys starting with us, you know, in most cases, guys have reached that level, aren't still working in the local, you know, the indie show, even though ours is bigger than a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And that's why I have more respect in the world for Hammerstone than anybody that I've ever worked with, because Chris Bay, we trained him. So Chris Bay's going to have that loyalty of, hey, when I didn't have dues and Joe let me train, if he's a good person. Obviously, if he's a piece of shit, he's like not going to care. But Chris is a good person. So he's grateful for what I did. Hammerstone lives in Arizona. He's still got to drive to my show for a third of the money that he probably would make somewhere else. But he's still willing to do it. And that's why I try to limit him on the shows, because he's such a good dude. And if he has it open, he's never once said to me, hey, Joe, I know I booked you on a show, but I got the opportunity to go here. And it's like, oh, that's a big show. He's probably going to make a lot more money, but he's going to take the gig that he already took because he's a man of his word. And you know, and that's why he's got the freedom to kind of do whatever he wants. Me, hey, I want to do this, you know, hey, I don't really want to work this guy. And I'd be like, okay, no problem. Like, if he has a personal issue with somebody, he's earned the right to do that. And you know, that's the great thing about our roster, that we got guys like Chris Bay, who's a major star, Danny Limelight now, No Limits champion. We have a lot of these dudes that are making good money wrestling everywhere else, but they want to wrestle in FSW.
Yeah, no, that shows definitely the character of each of those individuals. One match that I would be remiss, one of my dogs trying to get my attention, but
yeah,
I I want to talk about, because you got the FSW Women's Champ Viva Van having a match against, I believe it was J Robbie, and correct me if I'm wrong on pronouncing that name.
Johnny Robbie. Johnny Robbie.
Johnny Robbie. Well, I'm not, I'll admit, maybe not as familiar from, this area with said people. I talked to the promoter over at Warrior Wrestling a lot, that I'm always open to watching new wrestling, watching some people I might not be as familiar with, because it gets me eyes on not only new people, but maybe even a new promotion, some instances. And I'm excited to see what this match has in store, because I'll admit I might not be as familiar with each of them, but I'm a advocate of good women's wrestling, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Johnny Robbie is probably got a couple of years in the business, but she's one of the fastest rising women wrestlers in California. And her and Viva have had a bunch of matches. Actually, a couple of weeks ago in Arizona, Johnny Robbie beat Viva Van for their women's title. So it's an interesting matchup. We've just been recently using Johnny Robbie. She actually worked one of our better guys, Matt Vandergriff, a couple of weeks ago in an intergender match, and decided, that this would be the perfect opportunity. She is similar in the way with that a couple of years ago when Viva didn't have as much experience and she was a work in progress. And she has progressed to be one of the best women wrestlers around who hasn't been signed. So, it's a really interesting matchup, and we're excited to see it because, women wrestling, a lot of times I like working the guys, and, Viva has wrestled, everybody, and she's been on AEW, and she's worked with the best of the best. So, we don't think we will have her exclusively much longer. You know what I mean? It's like whether it's Honor, AEW, Impact, there's a good chance she's going to be signed, within a year from today, I would say. So, again, it's a good matchup. Johnny is newer to a lot of people, but I think if you haven't seen her before, once you watch the match, you'll be impressed.
Oh, I have a good feeling about that, and I definitely look forward to that one. I have a category I like to round off the show with, where, especially with first-time guests, where I have some random questions. Some might be wrestling related, some might not be. You give me the first answer that pops into your head with each of them.
Okay.
First one of the only ones I like to always keep in here, so it's not as random as some of the others. Craziest in-match moment that you have witnessed.
Craziest in-match moment. There was a match we did at the Silver Nugget that we ended up calling Too Violent for Television to air. It was like a 4-way tag match, and it just went berserk. I remember there was one guy, he wasn't really a trained wrestler. He worked as a manager, and he was managing Mike Modest's team in the tag. And earlier in the match, for some reason, the Suburban Commandos from California were in it. And I remember they were press slamming Mike Modest, and Mike Modest's girlfriend was his valet. She was sitting in a chair. They were holding her. And then they threw Mike, and they tried to throw Mike on her, and they missed. And Mike broke his arm in the match. The Commandos threw a chair at the guy who was their bodyguard. And instead of deflecting the chair, when they threw it, he went like this. And of course, that went into the audience.
Oh, no.
Ladder match. And it was the biggest. blood everywhere. And it was like stuff that wasn't supposed to happen. It just broke down to the most insane match, that we had. You can't call it in ring. When we did FSW versus GCW, when Cutthroat Cody got carved up by the light tubes from AJ Gray and Nick Gage.
Yeah.
Most people were like, "Oh my God," and he was just like, "Oh, this was great," And that's what he wanted, because the arena was so small, we didn't want to do light tubes in there. And Cody legitimately got mad at me, like, "Well, if we're gonna do this, I don't want it to be fucking GCW light." And I'm like, "Okay, well, come up with an idea." He's like, "Well, what if we go in the alleyway?" I'm like, "Sure." So they broke everything through the guardrails, and 100 of the fans that were in there all went outside in a circle and basically watched a mass assault in the back of the FSW alleyway. So that was another great in ring. But it was actually an out of the ring moment. So.
No, that is a good one. I know I've witnessed a couple crazy ones during my time so far. One was with a guy that I made him the best man at my wedding because he introduced me to my wife, but he was in a ladder match where the ladder was bridged between the ring apron and the guardrail. And he had the guy up I had him up on his back, and then he looked down, and I'm like, no. Jumped, ladder went like a V, and just insane. And then more recently, we brought up Sami Callihan. This was actually at his promotion, where it was Jake Christ versus Joel Bateman in a death match that happened to be just after they had a Monsters Ball match. They were getting ready to clean up. Jake Christ came in and said, "Fuck this, leave it here, let's go." And then all the craziness ended by 4 folding chairs where they bridged 2 panes of glass, and then Jake Christ's manager came in with lighter fluid and lit the glass on fire. It was insane. My job was on the floor.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, we try to stay away from that. I'm not against it, but it's like, kind of really needs to make sense.
No, that is true. That is true. If you're not a promotion that frequently uses it, when you do use it, you want it to make sense. Totally understandable. Next question. I kind of mentioned some of my dogs acting a little crazy during the recording here. Would you consider yourself more of a dog or a cat person?
I love my cat, but my dog by far.
I would have to agree. I'm in a similar situation myself. I got nothing against my wife and I's cats. One of them seems to love the shit out of me. I don't get it. It wasn't even my idea to get him, but I've always considered myself more of a dog person. I have talked to a few people about this, but what would you say favorite movie?
I would probably feel differently if I watched them today, but when I was growing up, it was like Scarface and Gladiator, and the Eddie and the Cruisers for some reason.
I know I heard this question on a different podcast recently, and one of the people answered with my personal thought of one of my favorite movies. That the question was, what was a favorite and least favorite movie sequel? And somebody said Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Secret of the Ooze. One of my favorite movies ever. I'm such a big Ninja Turtles guy. That, and then probably I've lost count of how many times I've seen the Forrest Gump movie, but that's another one of my favorites.
Well, I could say as much as Eddie and the Cruisers is one of my favorite movies of all time, Eddie and the Cruisers 2, Eddie Lives, is possibly one of the worst movies ever.
You know what? Sequels can either be really good or really bad. There's no real in between.
Nope, there sure isn't.
And, you know, with the name of the show, I would feel weird if I didn't ask this question. Favorite drink, whether alcoholic, non, or you can name one of both if you want.
Being a diabetic, I drink about 50 buy drinks a week. They are stevia sweetened, so there's no sugar and it doesn't affect my high sugar. So it used to be by far Snapple peach iced teas, but that was the worst. So the buy drinks now. Alcoholic drinks, usually Kahlua and milk's my go-to. I barely drink. I drank probably more on a vacation in the Bahamas and Mexico in the last year. And it was all, you know, the blue Hawaiians and pina coladas. I'm a fruity drink guy.
Nothing wrong with that. I know whenever I'm out at, oh, heck, my wife and I on our honeymoon, we went on an Alaskan cruise, and, you know, I was trying all sorts of drinks because we had the dang drink package. So nothing wrong with a fruity one every now and then for me. I got nothing against that. But last but not least, best advice for anybody wanting to get into wrestling.
Expect to work hard. Nobody's going to give you anything. And if you can't take positive criticism, don't even bother. You know, everybody wants to hear how great they are. They always want to hear that from their friends. Oh, that was a great match. It was like, no, it wasn't. It sucked. What are you talking about?
No, I can understand that because, you know, well, yes, it always does feel good to hear that somebody enjoyed your match. There, like we kind of talked about a little bit, there's always room for improvement. You can always learn new things. And if you're not learning what not to do, or hey, you might want to steer clear of this that happened in your match, you know, how do you know to stop it and then, you know, improve from there? So yeah, the feedback, the positive criticisms, it's all to help you improve what you're doing to make yourself better. And if, you know, you take the positive criticisms the opposite of how they're meant, then yeah, you probably aren't going to make it too long in the business, I would imagine.
Nope.
I would agree. Well, that is about all I have. One, thank you for taking the time to talk to me tonight. And two, where can people find you, find FSW? So if they don't already have their eyes on you and the promotion, they can go ahead and get them there.
You can go on the Twitter. It's FSW Vegas. Facebook, Future Stars of Wrestling. Instagram, I'm assuming it's Future Stars of Wrestling. That's the one platform I've never used. You know, the powers that be, my kid and all them, they're the ones who kind of handle that. We have our own FSW Network, fswnetwork.com. It's like $7 a month. And generally, you're going to get 2 live events from the arena every single month. And you also have a library of thousands of hours. You can watch Karrion Kross, 90% of his independent wrestling matches before he got signed were in FSW. Same thing with Solo Sikoa, Zoe Stark, Chris Bay. You know, you can also watch, you know, from 10 years ago, 12 years ago, Brian Cage and LA Knight and special guest Matt Hardy was our champion for some time. And If you could think of the biggest names in wrestling on TV today, we probably had them on our show. So you can check them out on the FSW Network.com. Our pay-per-view this Sunday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern. Mecca 9, Chris Bay versus Johnny Mecca. And that's $14.99, and it's on Fight TV.
Definitely. I got Fight TV. Definitely look forward to seeing that. We will have information on all those things in the description of both YouTube and podcast platforms. Like I said, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today, and best of luck with Mecca 9 this weekend.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.